Welcome to the Pulse of Africa Roundup, your premier destination for in-depth analysis of the most pressing current affairs on the continent. In each episode, we explore the key issues shaping Africa with in-depth insight and thoughtful discussion. Today's episode highlights the 17th BRICS Summit, which was held last week in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I'm your host, Adon Masai, joined by my colleagues Habib Mohammed and Girma Mirgisa. Stay tuned. Habib, Girma, thank you for joining us for today's episode.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's well known that the 2025 BRICS Summit took place in Brazil recently. So what's your reflection regarding the summit, and what were the new topics raised regarding the global South countries and their contributions towards the geopolitics of the global world?
As you mentioned, BRICS Summit took place from July 6 to 7, 2025 in Brazil. The leaders from member states, including our Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy Ahmed, and others, members of the BRICS, attended this summit under the theme of strengthening global South cooperation for more inclusive and sustainable governance. The BRICS summit discussed on various issues or the common issues between the BRICS countries.
BRICS 2025 agenda we're articulating is institutional reforms, equity and sovereignty, strategic autonomy are the key pillars that really entertain all these kind of agendas being tabled for discussions. For example, when we talk about global governance and multilateralism, we know that the world has been shifted in a kind of unipolar system, so the Western-dominated economic system, peace and security decisions, being spearheaded by the United Nations Security Council, and everything has been a concern by the rest of the world, like the global South countries, which represent half of the world population. So that's how the global governance issue has been tabled for discussion. The other agenda, for the first time in ever, the BRICS countries also adopted AI governance in the southern countries framework. For example, the issue of data security, the issue of data sovereignty in the entire African country has been an issue. For example, Africans use lots of internet platforms. You don't have protection for your data. You don't have who is accessing your data. So you don't have data sovereignty at all. So African countries, the BRICS African countries, or the rest of the Southern Hemisphere countries are also demanding this. We need to have our own framed AI governance systems. Climate and financial environmental issues also on the agenda, because the developed world are also responsible in greenhouse gas emissions, but Africa and the rest of the global South countries, BRICS member countries, are not being compensated for that. So that's an issue. Health cooperation and disease equalities as well. There are lots of pandemics that has been hit Africa and the global South economies, and nobody was there to help Africa mitigate with those pandemics unless Africa and the BRICS countries are really working on their capacity to alter all this kind of pandemics or communicable disease that really hit Africa for so long. So that has been also an issue. Cooperation and heritage justice, for example, during the colonial era. For example, Africa have been deprived many of its own indigenous cultural heritage. For example, we've been mentioning about a new hairstyle that has been revived in Rwanda, which has been a new young Africans are really articulating that we need to revitalize all these kind of traditional hairstyles, which has been taken as backward by the colonial eras. When the colonial eras are conquering Africa, they use this kind of new narrative that African styles is all outdated and backward, and they impose new Western styles, hairstyles, greeting styles, way of life, and everything. So, but who stated the status quo? I mean, we need to have a kind of system that African-based. So, from that perspective, we're going to take a look in this discussion as well. The BRICS countries really adopting. We need to have a global fair representation in terms of ensuring the peace and security of countries across the globe. So the BRICS can be a new frontier in terms of backing all this kind of mismelding of other countries' sovereignty and peace and security issues. So this is the top of the agendas which has been articulated in the 2025 Rio BRICS Summit. Maybe we're going through a little bit on your further question.
Thank you very much, both of you. You've fundamentally constructed pillars of this discussion. You've mentioned sustainable governance, global South demands on multilateralism, peace and security, and even mentioned the Amasunzu hairstyle worn by the Rwanda traditional society in pre-colonial eras, and which is still being worn by celebrities on Oscars and many other platforms. Thank you very much. Which brings us to our other observation, which is many more countries are showing interest in joining the BRICS. So what does BRICS aim to achieve by expanding its membership, and how might this affect its unity and its strength?
When you see the background of the BRICS, first, these clubs were coined by 4 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Now, after that, South Africa joined this giant club. Now, over the past 2 years, the members of these emerging economies reach 11 countries, which show amazing growth or interest from various countries to join these emerging economies. This is why, as we know, BRICS members has huge opportunity. For example, when we see in population perspective, almost half of the world population is in this members group, and also about 40% of GDP is in group in BRICS members, as well as around 26 trades among the BRICS members countries. So such opportunities, such opportunities is very important to attract the attention of various countries to join such clubs in order to access new avenue for markets or trade and investment. For example, when we take our country, Ethiopia, Ethiopia is one of the second populous nation in Africa, and also one of the countries that have ample opportunity for foreign direct investments. And also Ethiopia wanted to attract more foreign direct investment and also export its product to international markets. So this BRICS is very important for various countries to attract such opportunities. It is also important to diversify trade development and also try to search for other resources for climate finance. There is also the globe is not fair as we expect. There is a lack of representation. Maybe these groups important to overcome or to address such issues.
Your response highlights the transformation of BRIC into BRICS and the 11 more countries that have joined recently. And you've also mentioned captivating points regarding the South-South cooperation, and Habib also highlighted the future aspirations BRICS envisions, as well as the deep economic dive it has in our day-to-day activities, which will lead us to our next question, which many viewers, I believe, will have it deep inside their minds. So should BRICS Summit be considered successful in promoting new agenda topics and in presenting common approaches that better reflect the positions of Global South countries?
Yes, I believe that this summit is successful because despite some difference among the groups, they come up with a strong and solid joint declaration, which is very important to more consolidate the relationship between the BRICS members also within other international order. For example, the leaders of the members reaffirming the strategic vision and BRICS spirits, and also to respect the members countries and also sovereignty, equality among the member countries. And also they reaffirm that as these global orders working in order to promote South-South cooperation, they are stressed for international financial reforms, which is very important for member states, not only for the member states, for other countries who still excluded from such international governance bodies.
We can better look at this question into two forms. For example, we can see it from in terms of promoting new agendas and topics this BRICS Summit has been dealing with, and also presenting common approach reflecting the Global South position in the international arena. I think we can see it in that way. For example, in terms of promoting these new agendas, of course, that BRICS can be taken as a successful deliberation in terms of dealing with this kind of new agendas. For example, in terms of AI governance, for example, India and other member countries are already advancing in terms of technological acquisitions in the world, so that we need to focus on unleashing the power of these member countries to ensure digital colonialism issues, ethical data use, and access to innovation. For example, we've been mentioning earlier that we don't have security for our data since the BRICS countries' data system are not distinct to the rest of the world. It's still Western backed. The internet we're receiving and everything is the technology we're still receiving from that. So we need to focus on that as a BRICS member countries. Of course, Ethiopia is one of them. And in terms of climate framework and financing climate agendas, of course, that the developing countries, there has been enormous climate summits which has been held for many more years, and none of them has been fruitful in terms of because the top Western countries like the United States and not been that much bold towards achieving those negotiations, climate action negotiations, so that BRICS is adopting its own negotiations in terms of funding climate. For example, after COP13, so the BRICS will go and have its own climate agenda summit, so that it will go and have its own BRICS-oriented climate agendas, so it can deal by its own, it can take measures by its own, so that it's not you are not only looking for Western countries or leaders to decide on a certain issue that's regarding climate, because we are sharing the same planet, and we need to act together for the same common cause, because climate doesn't exclude anyone. So the other is cultural and sovereignty and heritage resolution issues is also important for me, because as an Africa and the BRICS member countries, global size economies, we need to focus on our indigenous knowledge and culture, so that we'll go and have the confidence to spearhead in our development in technology, advancement in education. For example, we've been mentioning about how the revitalization of this culture imposed things can change the narrative and the perspective of young people who are already the custodians of the previous generation. In terms of promoting new agendas for this summit, of course, BRICS was successful. We can measure from that perspective. And the other issue is presenting a common approach reflecting global South positions. Of course, I think BRICS can also be successful. The summit can also be successful in this regard. So in terms of multilateral reforms, also if you mentioned that the United Security Council, for example, Brazil and India they've been showed up to be a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, but they didn't get a response from these member countries because the veto power lies only on 5 countries. So whenever we have a member country from the BRICS who are permanent member in the United Security Council, so that the voice, all this kind of decision will not unilaterally made in the United Security Council, so that it can favor all these member countries' interests, so that Africa's voices and the rest of the people's voices, countries like the global South countries, can be voiced on this international arena.
I believe there's a central hook in both of your responses, which is sovereignty and equality in Girma's response, and in yours is unleashing the power. So you have linked joint declarations in economic spheres vis-a-vis African experience in the world system, revitalization and environmental justice, as well as other equality notions which BRIC further expands in the future. So which further consolidates our next question. You have pre-stated de-dollarization before as a way of alleviating the Western-led global system. So what other ways can the BRICS help improve the global governing system, both politically and economically?
Thank you so much. You mentioned the BRICS members has been pushing for reforming various global bodies, including from political and economic perspective. When we see in political perspective, there is United Nations Security Council, which all of the times African countries and also other countries from various regions calling to reform these unequitable and democratic organizations. So the BRICS is promoting and pushing to reform such organization, which not inclusive for all Africans, maybe for Africans and also for other countries across the globe. So it's important for the BRICS to play its crucial role still to reform such body as not inclusive, as not fair, as not justable for all nations across the globe.
Girma has been going through all these political reforms, but let me highlight some of the economic reform because we've been mentioning that how, in what way that the BRICS can improve the global governing system, both politically and economically. So economically, I think economic reform, building a fairer global financial system is one of the top agendas of the BRICS countries. BRICS rejects World Trade Organization practices that favor the global north and promotes fairer trade rules, especially in agriculture and digital goods. That's why BRICS is really looking for restructuring of this international organization, including the World Trade Organizations. And IMF is also politically driven. For example, whenever you have a kind of internal reforms as a country that you've made, so there has been certain political agendas that are associated with the kind of funding that you might be receiving from this international financial institutions like the IMF. So what BRICS is really looking for is having its own financial settlement, issues, for example, building its own new development bank so that it can finance its own infrastructure and building new establishment economic activities that will go on to spearhead the continent without really relying on Western politically motivated funding that comes from IMF and other more international monetary organizations. So that's a major challenge because you don't receive anything for free. Yeah, there's no free lunch in the global economic system. So that Africa is looking for building its own system that it can rely on, so it can spearhead this economic system. This is what I can say at all.
Very interesting. I believe the three things that you've mentioned, the development bank, representation in non-governmental organizations, as well as multilateral reforms, are pavements towards what BRIC countries aim to have in the coming years. So data show that as of 2024, 40% of global GDP accounts of that of the BRICS countries, which outpaces the G7. So regarding that, how might BRICS focus on trade, as we've mentioned in economic earlier, climate and AI, help its members deal with global instability?
Thank you so much. When we see in trade perspective, you already mentioned that around 26% of trade is among the BRICS countries. So it's important for these emerging economies to further consolidate their relation in trade and investment as well. For example, they have ample opportunity to diversify trade among these member countries. For example, when we take China and Ethiopia, they have strong trade relations, particularly in various areas. Last time, China's allowed Ethiopia to sell its products duty-free, which is very important for us to easily access or to easily search for new avenue of market and trade among the BRICS countries. So we have huge opportunity in these members. It's important to explore such opportunity to further benefit for these countries, not only these countries, but also for the people of the countries. In climate perspective, there are a lot of activities has been carried out by various countries. For example, when you take our country, Ethiopia, there is a huge green legacy initiative has been undergoing here in Ethiopia. Very important to mitigate climate change and also to ensure sustainable environment, not only for Ethiopia, but also for the globe. So in this area, Ethiopia should play a crucial role here in these members to promote what Ethiopia has doing here in the countries. And also when you take in agriculture development, Brazil have rich experience, and also China in infrastructure, in manufacturing, and so on and so. So this emerging economy has huge opportunity, by the way. If we were effectively used, these members can easily be developed and get something from here.
Thank you, Garma. I believe Habib already mentioned these things prior to the question. So I would like to ask you something on our last point of discussion, which corresponds to President Trump's new tariffs impact BRICS countries differently. And what are some possible responses from the bloc?
The new 10% tariffs imposed by the US, especially by President Trump, that specifically targeting China, India, and Brazil. But I think it's better to look at how the US trade policy is currently affecting these member countries. For example, let's see China. China already in a trade tension with the US since 2018, and plus a new 10% tariff will go on to destroy China's export to the US market. For example, you look at the China's export restriction and capital inflows will be hit by these new tariffs. And if you also look India has a moderately hit country by these new tariffs. For example, India exports tech, pharma, and steel products to the US market. This is the country advancing on these three products. And if the new tariffs is imposed, or 10% tariffs is imposed to the India by the US new trade policy, so that will gonna hurt India's export market to that extent. I mean, moderately high impact on India's export market. And in Brazil, tariffs on agriculture products like beef, ethanol, soybean, all these export, the US is a major importer of these agricultural products from Brazil. If 10% tariff is imposed on Brazil, that will go and affect Brazil's foreign export to international trade. And when we see South Africa is also a loss of Western operated investments going on in South Africa. It is considered as a secondary poor country for many international investors, but that will going to kill the confidence of foreign investors if this 10% tariffs is imposed on South Africa. So all these countries are now members of the BRICS. So the members of the BRICS countries are really looking for they are not only looking for what potential sanction trade 10% tariffs will be imposed on their own import and export goods or whatever. They are really focusing on building on their own internal capabilities to resist all this kind of sanctions imposed by the US. So how it is expanding in its intra-BRICS trade and local currency use is a mitigation for this kind of Western imposed trade sanctions.
I believe your responses have highlighted the aims, the success stories, and challenges of the BRICS. Thank you very much for thoroughly discussing the recent Rio 2025 BRICS Summit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Viewers, today's edition ends right here. Next time we'll come up with a new one. Until then, goodbye.